Well, folks, it's another Pete's in the car talking to the camera moment. I hope people don't think I'm crazy like last time I did this, because it's so embarrassing. Anyway, okay, here's for this week's video, here's an idea that I've been sort of kicking around. Not really just an abstract idea, but an idea just for myself and how I think about things. I've been kicking this idea around for a while internally, and it's spiritual and intellectual and all that sort of stuff put together. But like a lot of you, I think one reason people are attracted to something like the Bible for Normal People or other sites or other authors is because they're transitioning in faith and they're going on this pilgrimage they didn't ask for. And the same with me. And for me, it comes out like this: like, I'm not always sure what I believe. I'm not always sure of it, right? I wrote this book, The Sin of Certainty, and that's there's a lot of autobiographical stuff in that book. I don't always feel sure, and I'm not always sure of what I think or what I believe. And I'm just sort of a person who has an analytical, questioning kind of mind. That's sort of what makes me tick. And it's not because I have an education, right? I think sometimes people say, well, you get a PhD or whatever, and you think too much about it, but that's actually backwards. I'm not like this because I have a PhD. I have a PhD because I'm like this, right? It's sort of, my curiosity is what drove me to seminary and graduate school, just trying to learn and understand. So it's just the way I am, and I've always been sort of a take it apart and see how it works kind of person. I joke with one of my colleagues at Eastern that we should have been engineers or something, because we just like taking things apart. I mean, literally, like a house. we just want to take it apart and put it back together again. And the Bible for me and my own faith journey is reflected in that sort of way of living, that way of being. So there you have it. And so I think for me, a big moment came a few years ago, and this was after I left Westminster Seminary back in 2008. About a year after that, a few months to a year after that, I just came to peace with the fact, really resigned myself, but in a good way, came to peace with the fact that, I am who I am, and I'm not broken, right? It's just, that's something that had been buried for me rather systematically for maybe 20 years or even longer. I went to graduate school and seminary because I was curious, but then coming back to teach at a seminary, and not just because it's Westminster, although that had something to do with it, but that sort of creative inquisitiveness, curiosity was sort of squelched. And what drove me into academic life was sort of pulled out from under me without me really even realizing it was happening. And the pressure to conform to others and ideas and all that sort of stuff got rather stressful. Anyway, but for me, it was like a good moment when I just resigned myself to the fact that I'm who I am, I can't help it, and I have to believe that God's okay with it. So this is just the way I am. I'm analytical and all that kind of stuff. So the question comes up then, and this is something I get asked a lot, and some of you have asked me in, Ask Pete questions or other forums like that, why I'm not an atheist. And that's a good question. I think about that a lot, and I have an answer to it. And it's because for whatever reason, I don't think of that analytical, let's say, left brain side of me as being competent to judge all of reality. And I think that's a good place to be for me, and I think maybe for other people too, I don't think that our ability to be logical and to analyze is the final arbiter of ultimate meaning. And in a way, thinking that it is, in my opinion, not a bit of Western progress, but a Western failure that, postmodernism has been addressing for quite some time now. So I don't trust my analytical side to make judgments of, whether God exists or not. Because that question is immediately if God exists, that question is immediately beyond my pay grade. I can't analyze that. And I don't think God is a bit of evidence alongside, whether trees exist or something. That never made a lot of sense to me. And so I've come to peace with that. And that's why I'm not an atheist, but I'm on this Christian path and sort of holding together two things. One is just how I'm made, that analytical side, but not letting it get out of hand, not thinking that I can now conquer reality with my brain, which I probably thought without even really knowing I was thinking that. I probably thought that for, a good many years of my life. But see, honoring not just my brain, not living in my brain, but honoring it, but also honoring my experience and intuition. And that's the other side of the brain. And I know some of you who know something about brain science, probably much, much more than I do. But it's a little simplistic to talk about left and right brain, like these two halves that don't talk to each other. And I'm sure that's true. It's very complicated. They sort of need each other from what I understand. But still, it's helpful to talk about them the analytical side and the more intuitive side. And I think they do need each other. And again, if God exists, is it only through the one part of how our brains work that God is accessible? And again, I wind up in this circle. I don't have a starting point for determining whether God exists, but I'm just sort of in a circle. If God exists, I don't believe that this God, this creator, would only be accessible to us through our thinking process, even though our thinking process is never irrelevant. And so I find myself leaning a lot on my experiences, and I talk about that a little bit too in the Sin of Certainty, experiences, God moments, and taking them very, very seriously, as seriously as I take, or maybe even more seriously than I take my my reading or my thinking or my writing or things like that. And in saying that, I think I'm in pretty good company with a lot of the history of the church, especially the contemplative angle, which stresses experience. And again, that was sort of a hurdle for me to get over. I wouldn't say a huge wall, but at least a hurdle to get over. Because like many of you, I was always trained as a Christian not to trust your experience, but only to trust the Word of God. Which is ironic because you don't read the Word of God or process it apart from your own human experience. And like brain scientists say, it's actually not the left brain that drives the right, it's the right brain that drives the left. It's not the left side that is dominant, it's more that part of the brain that comes along for the ride. We have intuitive assessments of reality. I would even say emotional assessments of reality, and our minds come along to structure that for us. Right? So I guess the long and short of it is that I don't believe in the primacy of the intellect for determining ultimate reality. So I just keep thinking, but I always try to hold my conclusions sort of at bay, sometimes struggling a lot, sometimes not really struggling that much, and try to have these parts of the brain really in conversation more. And a term that I've used to describe myself in that respect, and I think others have used it too, Mike McHargue may have used it in Science Mike in his book Finding God in the Waves, I can't remember. but sort of like an agnostic Christian, committed to the Christian faith, not just because whatever, but because it's actually deeply meaningful to me and moving to me and experientially validated for me, but also being agnostic about, what if this miracle is just a literary motif and didn't actually happen? Right? There are good reasons for saying that about, the feeding of the 5,000 or walking on water, for example. A lot of stuff, there are things that are just that are open to analysis, and you might come to certain conclusions, but not allowing those conclusions to undermine or to cancel out that experiential, intuitive dimension as well. And I think, to me, that's a mistake to do that. It would be a mistake, and I think this is why at least some people I know, friends of mine, even family members who are atheists, I think that's the mistake that they're making. It's a hyper-rationalism that even subjects religious experience to rationalism, and I think that robs it of its mystery and of its beauty. So that's not the final answer on life, but that's just sort of where I am. It's an idea that I've been kicking around, as I said. I may do a podcast about it, I don't know. I may write up something quick for a blog post. I don't know, but I share it in part because I'm sure a lot of you kind people, especially you Patreon people, are in that same boat as I am. So anyway, okay folks, listen, thanks again for showing up and just watching the video, leaving comments as you do, likes and things like that. It means a lot. So I'm happy to have you aboard, and let's continue this journey together. Alrighty, I gotta go to work now. See ya.